Between 2016 and 2022 in Germany, reality TV star Theresia Fischer underwent 2 leg-lengthening surgeries that increased her height by about 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches. The procedure required doctors to break her leg bones and implant adjustable metal rods, slowly extending them over time as new bone formed. Although the surgeries achieved the desired height, Fisher later said the process left her in constant pain during the recovery and emotionally scarred, revealing she felt pressured into it by a former partner and ultimately came to regret altering her body so drastically. Between 1975 and 1979, Cambodia was controlled by the Khmer Rouge regime, a brutal communist regime that targeted and executed educated people, including doctors, teachers, and anyone seen as intellectual. During this time, OB/GYN Dr. Hein S. Nagor was forced into labor camps and survived by hiding his medical background, knowing it would mean certain death if discovered. When his wife went into labor and required a life-saving C-section, Nagor faced an impossible choice: perform the procedure and expose himself, or stay silent and let his wife die. He chose not to risk it, and both his wife and their unborn child died during childbirth. On July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. Jack Black's teenage years were marked by addiction long before fame entered his life. After his parents divorced, he began stealing money from his mom to buy cocaine at just 14 years old, spiraling into substance abuse while still practically a child. The addiction took hold during a period of instability and isolation, but he later thanked a non-judgmental school therapist with helping to pull him back from it. Jack ultimately got sober as a teenager, avoided relapsing as his career took off, and has spoken openly about how early intervention likely saved his life. In 1986, a Yakuza member attempting to smuggle a live hand grenade onto a flight from Manila to Osaka nearly took down the whole plane by accident. While hiding in the airport bathroom, the grenade's safety pin came loose, and in a moment of panic, the man abandoned it and fled back to his seat. Seconds later, the grenade exploded inside the aircraft, blasting a hole in the fuselage and resulting in rapid decompression. The explosion injured 109 passengers, but the plane somehow remained airborne long enough to make an emergency landing, narrowly avoiding what could have been one of the deadliest aviation attacks of the decade. Investigators later revealed that the man wasn't immediately arrested because he'd been badly injured in the blast. When the explosion ruptured a hydraulic line, hot oil sprayed all over his body, leaving him with severe burns that required immediate hospitalization before he was taken into custody. Mike Tyson later admitted that he took his famous cameo role in The Hangover while struggling with a severe cocaine addiction, saying he accepted the job mostly for drug money and was so intoxicated he barely remembered agreeing to it. The same year the film was released, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus tragically died after a treadmill power cord wrapped around her neck at the family's home in Phoenix. Tyson later recalled arriving at the hospital hungover and so overwhelmed with grief that his first instinct was to grab a gun and, quote, "go crazy." He said seeing other parents quietly coping with their own dying children is what stopped him, and that Exodus's death ultimately became the turning point that led him to get sober. Tyson later said that had he not gotten clean, he likely would have died himself. In 1978, after North Korean commandos attempted to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee, Unit 684 was secretly created in South Korea to infiltrate the North and kill leader Kim Il-sung. The 31 recruits, many reportedly criminals or men promised money and pardons, were sent to a remote island where they endured years of brutal training involving extreme physical punishment, starvation, and harsh survival exercises that killed 7 members before the mission ever even began. When relations between the two Koreas unexpectedly improved and the assassination mission was suddenly abandoned, the remaining 24 men realized they had effectively become disposable secrets. In 1971, they mutinied, killed several of their guards hijacked a bus towards Seoul and exchanged gunfire with the military before most of the unit died in a final shootout and grenade explosion. The 4 surviving members were later captured, court-martialed, and executed. This little girl was diagnosed with dementia before she even turned 4. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6 she began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest. Here's an insane compilation of hospital patients playing instruments while surgeons operate directly on their brains. During certain brain surgeries, called awake craniotomies, patients are kept fully conscious while doctors remove tumors or treat severe epilepsy. The brain itself cannot feel pain, so surgeons can safely work while the patient is awake. Patients are asked to talk, sing, or play instruments during the operation, so doctors can map exactly which parts of the brain control speech, movement, and music. If the patient suddenly loses coordination or stops playing correctly, surgeons immediately know they're too close to an important area. In some cases, patients can hear the drilling and feel pressure but experience no pain. Some even have full conversations with the surgical team while their brain is exposed. This insane process allows doctors to remove as much of the tumor as possible while avoiding permanent damage to speech, memory, or motor function. So while it looks unreal, these patients are actually helping to guide their own brain surgery in real time. Winona Ryder's life has been shaped by trauma long before Stranger Things. At age 12, she was beaten unconscious by classmates who thought she looked gay, leaving her with a concussion, stitches, and lasting psychological scars. Years later, while filming Alien Resurrection, she suffered a near-fatal anaphylactic shock after reacting to a chemical used on her costume. Production halted as she was rushed for emergency treatment. By the late 90s, her mental health reportedly collapsed entirely, and in 2001, she was arrested for shoplifting thousands of dollars in designer clothes. While heavily sedated on painkillers, she later admitted she'd been abusing. The fallout destroyed her career for years and forced her into a long period of therapy before she slowly resurfaced in Hollywood, a period she describes today as losing myself completely. Winona later said she felt as though the world had turned on her overnight and that the humiliation pushed her into one of the darkest depressions of her life. It took years before she finally found work again, slowly rebuilding a life she once thought might never recover. Grace Van Dien, aka Chrissy, revealed that she was groomed by a producer while working on another project, an experience she said left her traumatized enough to step away from acting entirely. She described it as one of the darkest times of her life, saying Hollywood had become unsafe for her and that the incident permanently changed how she views the industry. Before Stranger Things, Brett Gelman endured years of darkness, losing his younger brother in a sudden tragedy, spiraling through severe depression, and battling suicidal thoughts while he struggled to afford rent and avoid homelessness. He says he was quietly blacklisted in Hollywood for speaking out against abusive workplaces, leaving him convinced his career would be over before it ever started. Mark Steger, the performer inside the Demogorgon suit, has said the role was one of the most physically dangerous of his career. The practical suit trapped extreme heat, restricted movement, and weighed so much that he repeatedly suffered heat exhaustion, ligament strain, and even collapsed during takes. At one point, he collapsed so fast the crew thought he'd gone into cardiac arrest. Steger said the Demogorgon required total body endurance just to survive filming days. This was the shocking moment when a routine health inspection turned into a chemical crime scene. At a public event in Denver on November 16, 2025, a city health inspector walked up to a Colorado food vendor and dumped bleach straight into their fresh prep bowls, guac, onions, limes, and all. The vendor had reportedly been cited for a basic violation, something most inspectors handle with a warning or a shutdown notice. Instead, this one chose to douse the food in chemicals, turning a full day's worth of meals into a toxic soup while stunned bystanders could do nothing but watch. The city is now scrambling to explain how a simple violation escalated into something so extreme. In 2024, a seemingly healthy 47-year-old New Jersey father collapsed and died just minutes after eating a hamburger at a backyard barbecue. His autopsy came back clean, no heart disease, no organ damage, no toxins, so the death was simply labeled sudden and unexplained. Months later, specialists discovered he had extremely high levels of antibodies tied to alpha-gal syndrome, the strange meat allergy triggered by Lone Star tick bites. His body had gone into a hidden anaphylactic reaction to the beef he'd eaten just fine his whole life. It's now considered the first documented fatal case of alpha-gal, proof that one unnoticed tick bite can rewire your entire immune system in a deadly way. In one of the most evil cases of betrayal ever recorded, a man from New Zealand secretly infected his wife with HIV using a sewing needle dipped in his own blood. After cheating on her and being diagnosed himself, he feared she would leave him. So while she slept, he pricked her leg, leaving only a tiny sting and a red mark. Months later, during a routine checkup, she tested positive for the virus and confronted him. He chillingly confessed, saying he only did it so she would be the same as me and would never leave. Prosecutors later called it an act of pure cruelty, and the man was sentenced to prison for willfully injecting another with a disease, a charge so rare that even the judge called it almost without precedent. In one of the most disturbing cases ever shown on My Strange Addiction, a Tennessee woman named Casey developed a heartbreaking obsession after her husband Sean died suddenly from an asthma attack. Stricken with grief, she began carrying his urn everywhere, talking to it, sleeping beside it, and treating it like her husband was still alive. One day, when some of the ashes accidentally spilled on her hand, she instinctively licked them off, and soon enough became addicted to doing it deliberately. She admitted to eating the ashes up to 5 times per day, worried that if she ever stopped, she'd truly lose him forever. The ashes reportedly tasted like sand and rotten eggs, but she couldn't resist the rare feeling of closeness it gave her. Over time, she eventually consumed nearly a pound of her husband's remains, until appearing on the show finally made her realize how far her grief had gone. After filming, Casey entered therapy and eventually stopped consuming the ashes, keeping his urn nearby as a reminder of love rather than loss. In 1995, 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo from Brooklyn became the face of one of the most horrifying child abuse cases in New York history. After years of living safely with relatives, Elisa was placed back in the care of her biological mother, Awilda Lopez, despite repeated warnings from family members and school officials about ongoing abuse and neglect. Almost immediately, neighbors and teachers noticed that Elisa had changed. She often arrived at school bruised, withdrawn, and terrified to go home. Over the next year, Awilda subjected her daughter to relentless cruelty. Elisa was often locked in a dark room for hours, forced to eat scraps or nothing at all, and denied basic care. Witnesses later recalled hearing her cry for help through the walls, while her mother screamed insults and accused her of being evil. She was beaten repeatedly, forced to sleep on the floor, and frequently sent to school with visible marks that no one acted on. In November of 1995, the abuse reached its breaking point. Awilda slammed Elisa's head into a concrete wall, inflicting a massive head injury that caused fatal brain damage, and by the time paramedics arrived, she couldn't be saved. Autopsy findings revealed injuries consistent with chronic physical and sexual abuse, including genital trauma and signs of repeated violation. Awilda was later convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. After serving over 2 decades, she was released in April of 2022, a decision that reignited outrage among those who still remember Elisa's case. Her case horrified New Yorkers not just because of its brutality, but because it was preventable. Teachers, neighbors, and relatives had all tried to report what was happening, yet every warning was ignored. In the aftermath, the city passed Elisa's law, aimed at preventing child welfare agencies from concealing such failures ever again. Moments before tragedy, passenger Dave Halley snapped a photo of his wife Kim and their 4-year-old daughter Megan, smiling from their seats on Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, unaware it would be their final picture. Minutes after takeoff, the plane was struck by a Russian missile at 33,000 feet, exploding midair and scattering wreckage and bodies across miles of Ukrainian farmland. Every one of the 298 passengers and crew was killed instantly. Some of their belongings and passports later found among the debris of what investigators called one of the most awful war crimes in aviation history. Yet Russia continues to deny involvement to this day, still refusing to extradite those responsible or pay any reparations for the awful tragedy. A Colorado man named Wayne Watson developed a rare and irreversible lung condition known as popcorn lung after years of eating and inhaling the buttery fumes from multiple bags of microwave popcorn every day. The artificial butter flavoring contained diacetyl, a toxic chemical that can scar and destroy airways over time. In 2012, a jury awarded him $7.2 million after ruling that the popcorn maker failed to warn consumers of the dangers. Doctors said his lungs had deteriorated so badly that they resembled those of an industrial worker exposed to chemical vapors for years, all because of his daily snack habit. On Halloween morning in 2025, former TV news anchor Angie Mock was arrested in Wichita, Kansas, after allegedly stabbing her 80-year-old mother Anita to death inside their home. When police arrived, Mock was reportedly covered in blood with cuts all over her hands, while her mother was found deceased in bed with multiple stab wounds. Dispatch audio captured Mock claiming she stabbed her mother to save herself, though no evidence has yet explained what that meant. The once trusted newswoman, who had anchored for Fox 2 St. Louis, is now charged with first-degree murder and held on a $1 million bond. In 1998, Thai pop star Ruangsak Loichasak boarded Thai Airways Flight 261 and took seat 11A. Moments later, the plane crashed, killing 101 people on board, but Ruangsak miraculously survived, earning himself the nickname Iron Bones. Nearly 27 years later, history repeated itself when an Air India flight went down in 2025, and once again, the sole survivor was seated in 11A. Ever since, that seat number has become one of the fastest to sell out, since customers believe it will give them a higher chance of survival if the plane happens to crash. In 2015, doctors were baffled when a healthy 5-year-old boy's sodium levels skyrocketed inside a New York hospital, setting off a mystery that would expose a horror no one saw coming. For years, 26-year-old Lacey Spears told friends and followers that her son Garnett was chronically ill, documenting his mysterious sickness online to garner sympathy. But when the 5-year-old was hospitalized in New York, doctors found his sodium levels had mysteriously spiked to near-fatal levels, 182 milliequivalents per liter, so abnormally high that staff initially thought it was a lab error. Surveillance footage later showed Lacey taking her son into a private room and secretly administering large amounts of salt through his feeding tube. Hours later, Garnett suffered massive brain swelling and passed away. Investigators later found feeding bags in her apartment coated with salt residue, along with Google searches for dangers of high sodium in children. Spears was eventually sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, her case becoming a chilling example of Munchausen syndrome by proxy taken to the extreme. Neil Peart, legendary drummer of the band Rush, lived through a series of devastating personal tragedies. In 1997, his 19-year-old daughter Selena died in a single-car accident while driving to college. Less than a year later, his wife Jackie succumbed to cancer, though Peart later described it as dying of a broken heart. To cope with the losses, he took a 55,000-mile motorcycle journey across North and Central America to cope with his grief. Though he eventually returned to music and remarried, Peart later died in 2020 after a private battle with brain cancer. In 1991, 25-year-old Gregory Green stabbed his pregnant wife to death and spent 16 years behind bars for the crime. After his release, he married the daughter of a pastor who helped him earn parole and started a new family in Michigan. But in 2016, history repeated itself in a scene far more horrifying. Green tied up his wife, shot her 2 children from a previous marriage, then poisoned and suffocated their 2 young daughters, ages 4 and 5. When police arrived, they found his children dead and his wife bound and bleeding in the basement. Green calmly surrendered, telling officers, "I just killed my family." He later pled guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to 100 years in prison, ensuring he'll never get a second chance again. In February of 2022, 25-year-old Taylor Shabiznis killed her boyfriend in one of Wisconsin's most horrific crimes in modern history. During sex in the basement of his mother's home, she strangled 24-year-old Shad Therian to death after a night of heavy drug use. But what she did next was beyond comprehension. She continued to violate his body for hours, then used knives and a chainsaw to slice him apart, deliberately placing his severed head in a bucket and leaving it in plain view for his mother to find the next morning. When the woman went downstairs, she came face to face with the unimaginable, her son's head staring back at her from inside a blood-filled bucket. Shabiznis later told police they'd have fun trying to find the rest of him. And her violent behavior didn't end there. During a 2023 court hearing, she suddenly lunged lunged at her own attorney, knocking him to the ground before being restrained by deputies. Shabusiness was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole. This man swore he discovered the secrets of the pyramids and then built something that shouldn't be possible. Coral Castle in Homestead, Florida is a massive stone structure built single-handedly by Latvian immigrant Edward Lead Skalman between 1923 and 1951, using more than 1,100 tons or 2.5 million pounds of oolitic limestone. Ed stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds, but managed to carve, lift, and position multi-ton blocks entirely on his own, often at night and without witnesses, sparking decades of speculation about how he moved such massive stones without any machinery. Visitors swear the site feels engineered with impossible precision. One of its stone gates, weighing over 8 tons, can spin freely with the push of a finger. Ed always claimed he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids, but never explained his methods, leaving behind perfectly balanced stone doors, astronomically aligned carvings, and walls heavier than cars. Coral Castle remains one of America's most mysterious handmade monuments, built out of obsessive heartbreak after Ed's fiancée canceled their wedding just a day before the ceremony.